I want to get a sense of the markets where they're going right now. And, of course, we're hearing so much back and forth, and Connell outlined it here. We might be seeing the first signs of the impact of these higher rates, not necessarily bringing inflation down, but these job layoffs up. Should we worry? Luke Lloyd joins us right now, the Strategic Wealth Partners investment strategist. Dave Maney as well, the Expert Press CEO. Luke, to you on what we're looking at here, and Connell outlined it, and the fact that this is now not being sort of isolated events where you see a gap, laying off a few hundred folks, and then you hear about companies that are not hiring as much holiday season help as they had last year. Where do you think this is going?
Did you see Elizabeth Warren's Twitter post, I think it was, yesterday? I mean, Elizabeth Warren's already pointing fingers at the Federal Reserve for the rising unemployment rate that we're going to see over the next year. But it's the same old blame game cycle. Politicians blame the Fed, and the Fed will blame politicians, when in reality, it's both politicians and the Federal Reserve, both, that got us into this mess. So if they stopped interfering in the free markets and they stopped pushing narratives, that would be in the best interest for the majority of Americans and the majority of the world. But so, going forward, I think the two factors for the economy right now, and when we get some sort of stable growth in the economy, is all reliant on the job market and inflation, those two variables, right? Until inflation gets back down below 4%, we won't see normalcy in the markets. The kicker and the key to that is what unemployment rate is attached to that 4% level of inflation. Is it 4% unemployment? Is it 5%, 6%, 7%? If we're able to get inflation down to 4% while maintaining a lower rate of unemployment, I find that very unlikely, then the economic pain is going to be pretty limited. But I think the most likely scenario is a pretty high rate of unemployment, closer to 5% or 6% unemployment. So then the Fed essentially trades one family mandate for another. So what are they going to do? They're probably going to become more accommodative at that point, and that's when you're going to be wanting to buy the stock market and get into equities.
Yeah, I don't know how soon they get to be accommodated. It doesn't look like anytime soon, but I could be wrong. Dave, I'm also wondering.
Not anytime soon at all.
We're right. So, Dave, that gets to you and how long you see this dragging on here, because you could argue that as of yet, if all of these rate increases we've seen, and by the end of the year that the overnight bank lending rate essentially quadrupling from what it was, last year at this time, then you got to say they could overdo it. In other words, if they're waiting to see the first signs of inflation easing, by the time we see those signs, they've done a lot of damage.
Yeah, they could very well. And I'll tell you something else, Neil. I have laid off one person ever, or separated one person ever, over Zoom. Wow. And out of necessity during the pandemic. And I'll tell you something, it's way easier to fire people remotely when they're not in your office. And so this wave of layoffs, there are factors at work here that nobody understands. And one of them is this whole remote work thing. So when you see the Facebook guys show up and say, hey, we're going to have a big round of layoffs, remember Facebook are the guys who are rebelling against coming back to the office. It is way easier to make the kind of adjustments and cuts at the company side than it was before, and they could come a lot faster and outrun the intent of the Fed.
It also will have a direct effect on this so-called quiet quitting, right? I'm wondering, Luke, what you make of that. I don't think it was just coincidental that, a couple of weeks ago, Goldman Sachs was announcing layoffs. Not markedly high layoffs, a few hundred people in the scheme of a operation like that, a relatively small number. But at the same time, they're talking about, this environment where people have to get back to the office.
No, I think that's a great point. I think that's something you have to definitely take a look at. But you also have to remember that the economy was fueled by debt for 13 years straight, right? It was fueled by 0% essentially interest rates and trillions of dollars printed from the fiscal side of things. So businesses were much willing to take on risk over the past 13 years, and they're not as willing to take on risk now. So you see these quiet quits, you see these people leaving jobs, maybe going to another job, getting paid more. That's going to come to an end soon as those job openings really come to a close and people in the economy kind of resets. mean, that's kind of what we need in this environment, is the economy to reset. We can't live off of debt forever, and we can't continue to pump trillions of dollars into the economy. I mean, the positive side of this is that after a year or two down the road, we can finally let the free markets work efficiently again. That's going to provide some stable long-term growth. I mean, the thing is, when everything's kind of artificial like it's been over the past 13 years, you can't have stable long-term growth. So it's really about over the next 2 years, is the government going to continue to be as involved influencing business decisions and influencing the economy? If the government isn't as involved over the next couple of years, which is I hope that's the case, then we're going to be set on a good path going forward. But knowing history, the government continues probably to be involved.
Oh, I do know this much about the so-called laissez-faire markets, though. They like the government to be doing what they want to do, and anything that helps them out. And they would probably prefer the Fed to pivot right now than not pivot. This might be the good thing to get inflation under control now, because it can wreak havoc down the road. So I don't know what the markets really want. What do you think? What will make them happy?
Oh, yeah, I think just less what feels like uncertainty. I mean, we're in an era when we got, Russian dictators threatening nuclear war. That didn't happen that often when I was a kid. I mean,
that is a bit of a Debbie Downer. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
There's a lot going on. And my guess is that once we see how layoffs work in a remote work economy, and once we see how the Ukraine thing plays out, and once we see kind of if the Fed is, sensitive to overrunning the targets, maybe it's just going to take a couple of months or several months, Neil, before everybody kind of realizes what a new normal is.
Yeah, I hear it. We're just getting an idea what a normal anything is tough these days. Gentlemen, I want to thank you both very, very much.